Hello and welcome back to episode 5. Is it 5? Because we didn't drop last week.
Yeah, I think it's 5.
I think it's 5. Episode 5 of Kofi and Ren. And before we go further, we just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, those being the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And we just want to pay our respect to those elders, past, present, and emerging. This will always be Indigenous land first. And yeah, without further ado, let's hop into it.
Yeah, sick. So just a little
first, like a welcome as well. Well, welcome back to you.
Yeah, welcome back. So we had a bit of a
technical difficulties.
Yeah, technical difficulties. Last week we shot an amazing episode on Australia Day or Invasion Day, and we expressed our opinions on the day, and we had a really great discussion about it. But unfortunately, we had audio issues, so there was a lot of clipping that was happening with the mics, and hopefully that will not be the case today. It won't be the case today because this will be going out.
Even if it is, we're dropping it anyway.
Yeah, you guys might just have to deal with it because we're trying to do consistency this year.
Exactly.
So we're just gonna have to go for the role, but
exactly. Just know the work is still going in. We didn't drop off last week. We had difficulties, so don't think that we didn't shoot. I was too busy. We made it work. Yeah,
maybe we'll shoot just get bloopers out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's been a week that's been past Australia's National Day, and it's a divisive day for a lot of people in Indigenous people of this land. And me and Noah still want to actually discuss it because I feel like with any thing that people think is a political movement or a social issue, sometimes with it, even back in the day with the Black Lives Matter situation, things will have its just due their time. Then people move past it. However, those issues and struggles that people go through are still there every single day. But it's no more in the spotlight, so we kind of forget about it. But we think a week's passed, but we still want to talk about Invasion Day or Survival Day.
Absolutely. And we'll also be talking about in this episode, in addition to that and kind of in connection to that, essentially kind of a rough discussion based on how Australian media kind of contributes to that in a sense. And that will be kind of coming off a recent article about this play that I got to see 2 weeks ago now called 7 Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner, in which that play, the producers, they put a thing out saying they wanted only PoC reviewers to review the play, and The Age in this case they didn't have any. And they released an article talking about should white reviewers be able to, should white critics be allowed to review PoC work, and a discussion around that, which and then unfortunately as well, when that dropped in the print version, there was also a racist cartoon with it. So we'll kind of be talking a little bit about the kind of dynamics of both Invasion Day and this example, but we'll start with talking about Invasion Day first.
I wanna steal bits and pieces from our last discussion because I think some of the things that we spoke about there were really good.
Definitely.
And one of the things that we wanted to talk about is just our own experience of the places that we've grew up and lived and been brought up in, and how when we came into Australia, how that kind of shaped and shocked our view of the country.
Definitely.
And I think it will be a really good way to start it because like people kind of just see us as friends and people who are just I don't know, good people to be around and fun, but we don't also sometimes express, I don't think I do it enough as well, express that I am a South African, I come from a different culture and what that brings. But why don't what's some of your story? How have you come to Australia, and what is your first initial thoughts and experiences of Australia?
Well, I think for starters, I'll say in one way that you and I are similar is that we've both had a 3-country experience. We're both third culture kids in both the literal definition and ironically because we've lived in 3 different cultures. And so for me, that starts in England. I was born and raised in the UK until I was 9. Then we moved to America when I was Then when I was 9, we moved to America. It was 2007. We were there for about 4 years, and then we moved to Melbourne in January 2012, which is where we've been ever since. It's where this podcast is coming to you from. I say Melbourne, but its Indigenous name being Naarm for those who are watching outside of the country. Naarm is Melbourne's, that's the name of the land that Melbourne was built on after it was going to colonize and stolen from Indigenous people. And in terms of, did you want to start with my kind of cultural experience or kind of coming into Australia, or was like, or kind of both?
I say do whatever you want, man.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess to kind of like paint it in regards to coming to Australia, one thing that anyone who's been outside of Australia or has lived outside of Australia will understand is that because Australia is so geographically far from so much of the world, Australia is kind of like this far off place that like one day you'll kind of go there and see, you know, like you'll see the nature, you'll see the Sydney Opera House, you'll see the kangaroos, all that kind of stuff. And I remember in primary school, I remember at one point, I forgot what year this was, maybe 3, something like that, maybe 3, maybe 2. I remember we actually had like, we kind of focused on Australia. And I remember in that class learning about, you know, about Indigenous culture. We did learn about, obviously, you know, stuff like kind of, you know, Sydney Opera House, kangaroos. But I remember we learned a lot about Indigenous culture. I remember they brought in a didgeridoo. We got to like try and play one. You know, we got to make like Indigenous style paintings in class. And so from an early age, even though I didn't know much about Australia, I kind of had a vague sense that like Indigenous people exist there and they're a part of the country. There's that. So there's pretty much Indigenous people, that kind of culture. And then obviously like, you know, a Steve Irwin, Kangaroo Jack type vibes, all that kind of stuff. So it was a mix of that, right?
Crocodile Dundee.
Crocodile Dundee. It was because of that lesson and that education I got, ironically in England, which is, you know, the big daddy of colonialism. It definitely probably wasn't as robust as it needed to be, but I got way more exposure to Indigenous culture there than I did in high school in actual Australia. But we'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, so I remember then we moved to America, of course, and you know, again, mind you, at this point, never did I think I was going to be living in Australia. Like that's like when you're outside of Australia, Australia is not a place that you're like you ever think you live. It's just some far off place. But then when I found out we were moving to this place called Melbourne, first we were like, what the hell is a Melbourne? Like, what is that? And then we moved here. And I remember expecting to see Indigenous people around the same way you see black people in the UK or America. And to my surprise, I didn't see that many at all in Melbourne. I saw like very, very few. But it wasn't a big amount. And, you know, I was kind of, I guess there aren't that many people. And then coming here, I kind of have a bit, you know, I'd heard a little bit about, there aren't as many of them now because of colonialism and stuff like that. In the same way, there aren't as many Native Americans in America. But it was kind of like this kind of distant, far off thing. And of course, you're a kid in high school, you just kind of go about, you're not thinking about these things. And the older I got, the more I realized, particularly outside of high school, that's kind of when I realized I didn't actually get any Indigenous education. I know that for some watching this, I know for you, and I'll let you go into your story in a bit, it's you know, there were kind of options to maybe do modules or whatever. From my memory, I don't even remember there being an option in my school to learn about these things. Everything I kind of heard in high school was kind of word of mouth, or it's actually kind of really bad what's happened there, or this and that kind of stuff. And like I first heard about the whole, you know, Indigenous people being considered flora and fauna till 1966. I heard that like that was word of mouth, and I later looked up and was like, oh damn, that's true. So yeah, my education on it was basically non-existent. And then I came out of high school and started going to more kind of creative events, started mixing in more, you know, kind of, you know, meeting more people, kind of more PoC groups, because my school was very like not diverse. And I've kind of gradually been learning more. I've still got so much more to learn, but I've been shocked and blown away just how much Australia has swept under the rug in terms of Indigenous people. Because I'll just mention as well real quick, because with America is, they too have, obviously they've got slavery, they've got, you know, the genocide to Native Americans, but because they essentially got a head start with it, and they're also, America is such like a, you know, it shoves its victories down your throat. It kind of like, what am I trying to say here? I guess America's very like bold and very big personality, and so it's just like, but and in doing so, you're also kind of aware of its flaws loudly.
Yeah.
Versus Australia's got this kind of like, oh no, we're chill, we're relaxed, easy does it.
It's
easy
a lot
goes
more
it.
British in nature and
kind of real like, oh, this, but and so in doing that kind of subtle whispering, that kind of massaging of the shoulders, it makes you realize, hold on, like they did a madness to Indigenous folks.
Yeah.
And then like you say with the UK, it's like the UK is the epicenter of like, the epicenter of colonialism basically. But when you go there, it's like there's not much reference to it. It's like, oh yeah, you're gonna. It's not a very confrontational country.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the culture that leads into Australia.
Exactly. So yeah, but I've been learning a lot. I've been learning a lot more recently. I remember I went to a panel. So this will be the last thing I'll say for now. I remember I went to a panel last year. There was this Black Diasporas. It was at QV. They were doing a bunch of black short films by African Australians. But at the end, they had a panel. And I remember that panel being really eye-opening. I got to hear from some Indigenous voices, and I don't know. It really opened my eyes even more to how much there is to learn. But I've talked a lot. What's your experience, bro?
My experience, so for anybody who doesn't know me, I was born in South Africa and lived there for around 5 to 6 years. So
bring your mic up here.
we've had troubles before of me not really speaking directly into the mic, so I'm going to try to do a lot better for this episode. But I was born in South Africa, lived there for 5 to 6 years, and I've been back once or twice throughout my kind of high school living. But I think what differentiates probably my kind of childhood of moving to country compared to Noah's is probably you coming from the United States and the UK, which is predominantly established racist in history countries. Yeah. So like a lot of their kind of history and stuff like the Indigenous people in the United States, UK doesn't really have any Indigenous people. It's predominantly like a white culture, and that's kind of set in stone for how they kind of live about. They don't really
kind of see it's like that Western lens.
Yeah. But from my experience coming from South Africa, and moving to New Zealand, like I've coming to appreciate now how unique my experience was from coming from two countries who are really rich in its culture and appreciation for its like Native and Indigenous people. So for example, growing up in South Africa, the national anthem has like 4 different languages to it. It's a really multinational country, but in the sense that everybody takes an appreciation for other people's culture. Like in South Africa, just for example, like mosque and stuff like that, they'll have it, they're playing their like 5 a.m. prayers, loudspeaker, and everyone can hear that. And people just have like a sense of knowing and appreciation of those people are doing their things. We're going to respect that and we're going to leave it. So, people who come to South Africa, we're going to show you the Zulu foods. We're going to show you the culture. We're going to try to show you the, Zulu drums. You're going to get engulfed in what the culture of South Africa is. And that's something that's, I think, unique to a few countries. So me coming from that and moving to New Zealand, where it was a country where obviously there was atrocities that happened to the Maori people. There was a war, but there was a treaty. There was reconciliation. Maori culture is cherished in New Zealand. People see it every time they watch the rugby. They see the haka and they're like, wow, that is so sick. You go to the airport, you see the Maori art all over the walls. When I was in primary school, I was able to sit down with Maori elders. They went to their, I forgot what their kind of like meeting house is, where you can go and learn about like, the women would do their like dances with the like porphyry, which is like these balls that they dance with. We learned the culture. I had to learn the haka when I was in primary school. There was parts where you had to learn the language, So coming from that, when you're kind of in something already and you don't even know what it is from to not have that, you kind of just live in ignorance because you just accept and think that this is what it's like everywhere. So when I was 12 or 13 and parents said we were moving to Melbourne, I was just going in with the expectation that I was kind of going to see some of that already, like what you said, that you were going to see Indigenous people when you were here. You know, you'll see people playing the didgeridoo, you'll see. But when I got here, it was just like, damn. You know, you get off into the airport and it's like white walls. You don't see no Indigenous. You don't hear about it in the news. You don't hear about it in the schools. It's just like, oh, okay, this is just a Western nation. And that was like a huge surprise to me, and it was like really disheartening coming from other countries which always had that. And obviously there's issues in South Africa and New Zealand. There's going to be issues everywhere in terms of the native people not feeling like, you know, they have their voice in the land that is theirs. However, it was like tenfold coming here to Australia. But I was lucky enough in high school to be able to learn. It wasn't even like I was given the opportunity to learn about what happened in Australia. It was I chose a module for like war and history. They didn't name it like Indigenous culture. It was just war and history. So like 70% of it was World War I, World War II, the Holocaust. We went to a Holocaust museum. But like for the 30% of that, it was almost like it was in the fine print. We're also going to teach you about what happened here in Australia to the Indigenous people. And boy, did I get a shock. Like I knew it was cooked, but then like your first time hearing about, they stole kids from mothers' arms. So like when you hear that stuff for the first time, you're like, how on earth is this just like almost silenced?
It's crazy. It's like a different level of evil.
Yeah. So that was my kind of shock and coming to realization of things that happened here in Australia. So yeah, when kind of hearing about Australia Day and how it was really a sad day for Indigenous people, and then at the time you just see people getting sloshed on bevs and having pool parties and listening to Triple J, Hottest 100, like, bro, the ignorance is
it's nuts. It's nuts.
Mad. Yeah, so that's my experience of living in South Africa, living in New Zealand, being in places with culture and being able to see with a different lens how things are kind of swept under the rug and not really spoken about here in Australia. But yeah, that was my experience of it. I think one thing that now is good to slightly see is we're starting to slowly see that companies and it's slow, but there seems to be some bit of change where people are starting to now acknowledge a lot more the actual atrocities that did happen. So the Invasion Day protests had the largest in
it was. I don't know what the numbers were, but I went and it was really big. It was really big.
Yeah. And I think one thing from me, I don't want this to sound really dark and like gloomy. It is like a really touchy subject, and it's really sad the things that happened. But I think saying that, coming from those countries, I think one thing that I would love to see just brought more to light here in this country is to be a country where they can actually appreciate and put forward more of the Indigenous culture that really needs to be tapped into here.
Definitely. Because
when you come from a place that actually has culture and actually has an appreciation for its Indigenous people, it brings a bigger sense of pride to the country that you have than probably what people might really have here. And it enriches the country in itself.
That's such a good point, because it's like you kind of look at, you know, Australia's relationship with Indigenous people now, and it's kind of like this awkward kind of guilt, because obviously there was like the apology in 2007, and then there are now kind of steps to kind of recognize atrocities and everything like that, but there's still not like there's not enough cultural reverence, like you're saying. Like, it's not like this is something that we're proud of. It's like, oh, like, it's like if you do your friend dirty and then like things are weird, and I mean, it's definitely not. It's not the same. Like, but it's like imagine to use a kind of rough analogy. It's like you do your friend dirty, and then every time you're around them, it's kind of like, you know, that's, and you're kind of awkward around them.
Yeah.
Rather than actually like reconciling, and then actually like, you know what, not only did I wrong you, but I want to actually like find out about how I wronged you, how I can do better, how I can lift you up, and then you have that friend to be proud of. Like, yeah, like. And the history can never be reconciled, but kind of like you were saying, like it could be a thing where it's like, look, we recognize that we did this. This is what built the country. This is what happened, but now we're trying to lift up this culture, and it's something that we're actually proud. Not necessarily not being proud of the fact that I'm lifting up the culture, because that's what you should be doing.
No, definitely
not. But proud of the culture being lifted up. But you know what? We're like, in the past, we tried to push this down, but we were wrong, because look at how great this is.
Yeah.
And this is who we, it could be that, but it's kind of this kind of awkwardness. I mean, even in like, I'll just add one more thing.
Yeah.
Even in kind of like the kind of racist attitude you see towards Indigenous people from those who are like, or whatever, like one thing I've noticed is that in the difference between the racism towards Indigenous people, from kind of largely white Australians, but anyone else to Indigenous people, that's different from, say, like white Americans to Black Americans or Mexicans, all that kind of stuff, is that here there's like a sense of like, it's like a sense of it's like the ego's been bruised. Like, like why should why should we have to apologize? It's like not liking the fact that not liking the fact that you were wrong.
Yeah.
Versus in America, it's a bit more like just straight up malicious. Like, it's not about whether I was wrong or not. It's like, oh, I do. You know what I mean? I mean, it's obviously they're both linked. They're both similar. Am I making sense when I say that?
Yeah, I do get it. But also, like, this is something I felt when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening and people were asking for change and things.
Hold that thought for a sec.
Yeah.
Just want to check the laptop.
Yeah. Okay.
Make sure it's not frozen.
Yeah.
But hold that thought.
I'll continue on while you do that. This is something that really irritated me when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, and people were posting their black squares and their posting on the timelines. Is I knew that this was going to be very short-lived, this like empathy that people were having.
Definitely.
And the most irritating thing about that whole situation was I knew that while I was seeing that, nothing actually was really happening. Like, we were talking about the different racism of UK, America, and Australia. And I can only speak for me personally, but I hate when someone is racist and they feel guilty. Like, don't feel guilty. Like, do something about it. Like, guilt. Like, do you remember?
Guilt is useless.
Do you remember when all the US politicians, they wore their dashikis and they went down on one knee?
That was hilarious.
What did that do?
Yeah.
What did that do for anyone?
Oh man.
Especially here in Australia, like, I can't speak for Indigenous people. Like, I can't, but I don't think they deserve an apology, but they deserve so much more than just their guilt.
100%, because guilt, like I'm saying, guilt doesn't do anything. Like, even when I think of that with other intersections as well, like, I mean, we're talking about Indigenous people, but even when it comes to, as how as men in society we kind of play a part in women's oppression, or as straight people, we play a part in queer people's oppression. Like, us, look, guilt is it's the feeling is natural.
Yeah.
Like, the feeling, there's nothing wrong with getting the feeling of guilt. But if you just kind of sit in there and be like, oh man, I can't believe it. Maybe you lash yourself on the back a few times, or whatever. That's not doing that. Like you're saying, it's not doing anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's
like next time you're in a locker room and boys are talking crazy about a woman,
you call it out. You know what I mean? Or in your spare time, you actually take time to to learn about why you're wrong. Don't just be guilty, but like unlearn those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Learn where it comes from. That's where the action comes from. Change who you are as a person. Like, start shifting things. And that's 100% right. Like, guilt as an action is useless.
Yeah, and I think some Australians who are opposed to the day changing might feel that guilt as well, and feel like
definitely.
but why does like they
it makes them feel insecure as well. It makes them feel insecure about their identity as an Australian, which proves that they've linked it to the wrong things as well.
I mean, I think this is a country that is really beautiful and deserves to be cherished by everyone. Like, the land here is beautiful. Like, you know, you go out and you go see different places in Australia and you're like, wow, this is an amazing place. And just going back to saying about being proud of like Indigenous culture and being proud of not proud in the sense that you're proud that you're doing it, but just proud that you get to be able to be here and cherish what amazing culture that comes from Indigenous people and the knowledge and the experience that they have of this country, to be able to be in this country, be proud of that and cherish this country. So, and I think that's something that I hope in my lifetime I'll get to see, you know, that there'll be a day where I'll be like proud to be Australian and not be celebrating the kind of demise of one people group.
I hear that, bro, because kind of even coming off that note as like a thing on that, like, even though I've been here for 11 years now and I'm a citizen, I definitely feel like Melburnian. I don't really feel Australian.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that I'm not even saying this to shame Australia or whatever, but it's like, what is being Australian really, you know? In relation to the conversation we're having in terms of like, you know, what as Australians do we have to be proud of, you know, do we have to be proud of when we haven't reconciled our history with Indigenous people, you know? But kind of segueing slightly to the next part of the chat, and this is kind of pivoting, not away from Indigenous because it still links, but on kind of what you were saying about just like, you made a point, oh gosh, I forgot the wording you used exactly. But it was a really nice segue. This is kind of going into the other part of the conversation, which is kind of just like the conversation around, I guess, the art aspects and kind of and white eyes on black or PoC art and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if that's segueing that well.
No, it's not.
It's not.
But you know, okay. How about this?
It's not. Yeah.
On the topic of Invasion Day and Survival Day, I saw on a lot of different media outlets, them silencing the comments on a lot of the videos or any things that they post about a day. And I can understand sometimes that you don't want to be able a platform that posts that has a space where people can spew hateful comments, but why is your audience speaking like that? I mean, you can't control your audience, but I doubt people who listen to us are going to get are going to become the next Hitler.
Yeah.
Like, that's dramatic, but I'm just saying, like, if you're listening to us, I feel like, you know, you have some sense of empathy or understanding.
Definitely. So, I think the question is, what are you allowing space for?
Yeah.
You know, and to kind of go off that example, you mentioned kind of off air, and this does segue well into the next part of the chat, which I was really keen to talk about, is you saw some of this on several outlets, namely The Age.
Yeah.
And The Age, something that I was keen to talk about because I kind of got a bone to pick with them because, you know, personal opinion, The Age is trash. The Herald Sun is trash. The Sydney Morning Herald is trash. A lot of Australian papers, mainstream Australian papers, are garbage. And
to be fair, I don't really. I get my news from like word of mouth. I'll be honest. I don't really read newspapers, but I do watch like morning news. That's
yeah.
No,
The state of news is, and we could go into the state of the news in like a different chat. You know, Murdoch media, all that kind of stuff. We don't like Murdoch media. No, not a big surprise here. But the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because recently, obviously, you saw a lot of those kind of silence comments on The Age. The Age recently, they actually dropped an article on this play that I saw called Seven Methods. The play is called Seven Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner. And this play is one of like the best things I've seen. I've been raving about it like the last 2 weeks because it's genuinely that good. And the play, and this all, you know, bear with me. It all kind of is relevant. The play centers two black British women, And the play basically unpacks the ways in which Kylie Jenner and more society as a whole has commodified, black culture, particularly black women, their images, their body, all that kind of stuff. It unpacks that. It's an excellent play, fantastic, one of the best things I watched, right? I think I've got the article in front of me. Give me 2 seconds. It is right here. So this play came to Australia. It's been running in all over the world. But the Melbourne run was from the 19th to the 29th of January. And on the 29th of January, somebody called Elizabeth Flux dropped an opinion piece saying, should white critics be allowed to review the play? Its producers don't think so. Now, I realized, honestly, I shouldn't have even said the name, to be honest, because I don't even want to give clout to it. But look at it if you want. I disagree with it. But basically what it was talking about is, because what the production company did with this play, and this is the crux of the conversation, they basically said, we only want people of color reviewers or critics to review this play. And they did so in an attempt to protect the play, because obviously, as I described the play before, the play is very intrinsically about the black experience, the black female experience, the black queer experience, and so they wanted reviewers that could be able to be more effectively look at it and not be confused by it, because the fear generally is with things like this, and it's happened before, you have a play about a certain community group or whatever, someone from outside of that community, usually a white person, usually a white man, usually a white straight man, looks at it and says, oh, that doesn't make sense, or they look at it without the nuance, and they end up giving a review based on that, and then that art ends up being silenced because of the lack of understanding. But the reason why this article pissed me off personally is, one, I disagree with the article. I disagreed with strongly, and it very much irritated me, and to me reeked of a lot of fragility. But what made me irritated as well is because they posted a cartoon with it in the print version of it that depicted the two actors in the play, in a racist way, which The Age and the Herald Sun and papers like that have done before.
Yeah.
And that's just not fair, because the play was excellent, and the two actors, shout out to Chika and Iolanthe, who are the leads for the Melbourne show, were incredible. Like, incredible performers, incredible show. And I guess kind of coming off that, kind of want to just talk a little bit about what's, like, I guess kind of, the discussion coming from that is basically kind of our thoughts and discussion on the nature of that. Just like,
yeah, I think the main point that probably could come out of it is that the argument itself of should, because I think that was where they felt really hurt the most of, we wanted to review this, but you guys put out a criteria, and I think maybe
they didn't match the criteria.
And in a sense, kind of painting it in a way where it's almost like a anti-racist thing that they're doing by saying it's only have to be PoC people that can review this. We have someone who is not that. So, but now you doing that is, in a sense, if counterproductive. Yeah. So I think if we're gonna ever really give this topic just due, we kind of have to have, because if we were just both stating the same opinion on this, I think for any of the listeners or viewers who might sway in the middle, maybe for a lot of people, wouldn't get the best, I don't know, thoughts or able to think that much deeply from this topic, because, I don't know, without the nuance of it, you can just think, have like maybe a uneducated opinion from it. So the topic of, so I think originally in the article it said that they requested a spot to. I can read it out if you want. Yeah, I think it would be best if you read it out, because I don't want to.
Sure. So this is the beginning of the article. It says, over the past week and a half, an internationally acclaimed play called The 7 Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner has been showing in Melbourne. If you go searching for the Age's review, however, you won't find one. It's not because we didn't want to cover it. It's because the producers refused to, quote unquote, accommodate any reviewers who weren't people of color. While this stance was apparently driven by a desire to increase diversity among critics, a stance we agree with, Ultimately, it's a misguided move that promotes tokenism, undermines the health of the critical landscape, and does a disservice to critics, creatives, and the like. Now, I think I'm going to play devil's advocate in this sense because, like I said before, we can't just be both saying the same opinion. Yeah. So let me add one more disclaimer. Make sure you listen to that. He's playing devil's advocate. We're not agreeing with this article.
Please. This is a podcast, so we're trying to give you entertainment. But this is me playing devil's advocate. Yeah. To get the best out of this conversation. Yeah. So, Noah DaCosta. I study 10 years to be... 10 years, they're not a doctor. I apologize. No, I study...
Go along with it. Keep going with it, bro.
I study 6 years. I do my master's to become a critic in theatre, right? I have a lens for understanding the nuance of the enthusiasm of the performers, of the play, the writing, the script, the visuals, everything about it. I've studied for years. I've seen film after film after film and given my opinion. But I'm someone who is a Caucasian person, but that should not disqualify me from being able to come to a place like the Malt House and watch this show. Why can't I come?
Cool. It's not that you can't watch the show, because in the case this woman did, and critics were still allowed to watch it. It's not that your experience is invalid, but you have to look at it this way. You're a white straight critic who's been doing this for 6 years, longer. Well, no, you studied for 6 years, probably been doing it for longer. Yeah. You know what you're doing. You've seen film after film, play after play, you really know what you're doing, right? Here's the thing. You being a white straight man in Australia means that you've probably come up with a completely different experience to a lot of people of color, and I'm using that very broadly. This play is particularly about black women specifically. I do want to highlight that. I don't want to just put it all in the wash, because sometimes people say PoC and they're being racist against black people specifically. That's a different conversation. But it's not that your work or your study is invalid, right? But you've come up in a world in which you haven't had to unpack yourself. It's unlikely that you've had to unpack yourself in the world, because you are like you're the kind of top of the food chain in that sense. And then the study, the institution in which you learned is probably enforcing that. Yeah, you studied for 6 years, but it was probably Shakespeare, it was probably this, it was probably that, you know what I mean? Like, how many African stories did you come up with? How many Africans did you grow up with? How many Indigenous people did you grow up with? How many cultural people did you come up with? It's not a blanket statement, but a lot of these people working in these institutions, private school, then straight to uni, then straight this. It's like they haven't. I mean, when I came to Australia, and this is Noah, not the hypothetical arguer in this case, the school I went to, mostly white, and a lot of Eastern Asians, a few Eastern Asians, but it was mostly a white school. And so, and I know, I have friends who came up in just that lens, and then over time, partially through being friends with me, but also just kind of through the work, gradually learned. But I was a few of my friends, I was their first black friend. You know what I mean? And so to kind of bring that back to the argument, it's like, it's not that your experience is invalid, but it's like, this is a play that is intrinsically about something that you are unlikely to have an understanding, or less likely to have an empathy for. And we've seen that happen before with, white or Western commenters on black art, or even beyond black art, even just, Asian art, this art.
But why do I need to have no... It's like me going to watch Milan, right?
Yeah.
I can still go to watch Milan and say the movie was a bad play. Maybe the voice actors were trash. Maybe the plot was bad. Maybe there was things about the play itself that was actually kind of terrible. And that is what I studied for. That is what I went to college for. I can put myself or my experiences, or even look at a play objectively and look at it for what it's worth, and be able to have an opinion on that piece of work, because I studied my whole life to not be opinionated, but to be factual.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I believe that putting devil's advocate, I believe that putting this is tokenism in itself, because now you are just saying you only want a certain people to watch this film, because if we're just putting it, saying that there's bias in me coming towards this show and watching it, if there was an Asian person going to the film and watching Milan, maybe there was some cultural references that they're watching in the film and they're having a bias when they're watching it, and now they're appreciating a crap film when they're not looking at it objectively.
Right. And to that I would say, one, and I'm poking a hole in the devil's advocate hypothetical, right? Mulan is a film made by a Western company. It talks about East Asian culture, but it's still a it's a westernized version of Eastern culture in a way.
Yeah.
And so again, speaking to the hypothetical person, that's the type of argument that kind of person would use. At which point I say, well, even the example you used is still Western made.
Yeah. Okay.
I would also, so it's not actually like a true, I'm not saying it's invalid, but it's not a true example of actual cultural, like truly cultural art from that culture. I would also say that the fact that you would be approaching this play just trying to be unbiased and factual from your point of view, which is already grown in that like you are coming in biased. You're already coming in with a Western white bias already.
I've studied to not be biased.
No. But that the school you went to was built in the West.
Okay.
The teachers you had were born and raised in the West. The plays you watched and studied were created in the West. Everything has everything you learned, even if you don't intend to, has an intrinsically Western white supremacist lens, because that is what built the society we're in. So you're not coming in actually as unbiased as you think, but you've come up that your way is the unbiased way when it's really the Western way. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it's not that nothing should be criticized, but the thing about art is that art doesn't have the same function in everything. Like, and to use Seven, to bring it out of the hypothetical to the real again. This play, Seven Methods, even though it is actually it genuinely is getting good reviews. This play was made to expose and commentate, yes, and entertain, of course, in which it very much did. I was laughing the whole time. I felt the whole thing the whole time. My heart rose and fell as the play did. But this isn't something you watch. It's not something you watch and take apart. It's something that you watch and listen. Some things are meant to be listened to. It's kind of like almost like if, say, I watch a documentary on slavery, right? The atrocities of slavery in the West, in America, in the UK, in Australia. I watch this documentary and I say, the editing style wasn't that good. I don't think they I don't think they conveyed the message well enough. Like I'm missing the point. That they're trying to tell me about how bad slavery was, and I'm like, oh gosh, the color grading was a bit bad. Oh, when they reenacted
but that's the point of being a critic. It's regardless of the content and character of the work, we're looking at not only just that. You can convey a phenomenal message. You can convey the best message in the world. You can write the best speech ever. But if you're going to speak it in front of the world with a Blue Yeti mic and some KRK speakers to thousands of people, it's still a trash speech. You have to look at the content of what is being said, but also every aspect around it. And that's what me as a critic is looking at. Okay, and if I was going into this play to critique it on the content, I'd have to do my due diligence in doing research about the actual topic and then having opinion factual, not just based on my opinions.
Okay, but then and here's two aspects. One, again, you say factual, and again, this is talking to a hypothetical person and not Randall himself. you say factual, but it's like you've been brought up to believe that how you understand things are factual. That goes back to my point of the fact that you're already coming up in that biased lens. Second thing as well is that, like, how many pieces of art or things, times that move people have happened, and this is kind of almost wider than that, have happened in in an unflattering way or whatever, that have still had impacts. I mean, to use, obviously we don't have any we don't have any examples of the audio or whatever, or we don't have any pictures, but to use Jesus for an example, I mean, Jesus is one of the most famous people in the world. Everybody has a sense of who he is. Everyone has an idea of what his message is, right? But this dude did it. This dude, we don't know what he sounded like, what he looked like, but we do know that he did it outside of what critics or that time Pharisees thought was appropriate. But it was still poignant. The message was more important than, I mean, not saying Jesus wasn't as important, but his message was more important than the way in which he delivered it. Although he did deliver it in amazing ways, from the fact that it kept going for thousands of years. That example's kind of falling apart. But
no, I think I get your message there. You're saying that I'm having a lens of things that I think is factual, and for example, in the Jesus case, if people don't know the Bible, like, Jesus wasn't just walking in and saving people and there was sunshines and rainbows. Like, there was the Pharisees and the the philosophers at the time that had their way of thinking of what the Old Testament or the Bible said that they thought were factual, but they were seeing it in the lens that they were brought up. But then there was someone who was Jesus, who was coming and was speaking truth. However, they couldn't see it, and what they thought was factual actually wasn't factual at all. Is that the point you were trying to get across?
Kind of, yeah, pretty much that. But you know what? I've got another point as well that I wanted to add. Another thing I'll say as well is that, like, in terms of bringing it back to the whole kind of like PoC PoC critic for PoC things, and by extension a queer critic for a queer play, or whatever. To use an example, right? If there is a play explicitly about the experience of women, right, and the message is about women's experience, it's about the struggles of womanhood, the joys of womanhood, but it's intrinsically about womanhood, right? I'm now going to turn myself into a hypothetical. I go to that play and I review it, and I say, and this play does a very poignant job of illustrating what it's like to be a woman in the world, and talks about the anxieties and the fears that women walk with that men don't walk with, and I as a man go and review it, and I'm like, and I'm doing this for a big organization, right? A very valid one, right? I go and say, it was all right. 2 out of 5 stars. 2.5 stars out of 5. The acting was good. Didn't really understand the message. I'm kind of not really sure what they were. I kind of get what they were saying, but it kind of felt a little bit over dramatic. It felt a little bit, I felt a bit unrealistic. It felt this, and I kind of give my review, regular review, right? That goes on the paper. Oh, this play bombs or whatever. This play gets something stars. The entire message, the point of the woman who wrote that, is gone, because I looked at it as just a piece for me to take in, rather than what it's actually trying to do. Yeah. So my review as a critic is actually a dishonest one. It's not a full critique.
Yeah.
Because to look at that art properly and fully, I need to understand the experience more.
Yeah.
And to turn myself into that critic, white, straight, male critic, came up in, whatever, middle class to upper middle class school or whatever environment, 2-parent households, I'm straight, I go to a uni, wherever I study, I get in. There haven't been a lot of points, unless I've had maybe some other experience, or unless I've actually gone and separately done that work to unpack myself, which doesn't always happen. There haven't been a lot of experiences that have made me question my existence or who I am in the world. And now I'm going and reviewing this thing and saying, like, oh, yeah, I don't really get it. And then that's my review. Now I've silenced and suppressed that because I didn't have a full understanding. So to kind of speak to kind of your hypothetical again, it's like I in my not understanding of this, in my lack of understanding of this, am not well equipped to talk accurately and fully about what the play is. See, that's not to say that, that play should have gotten 5 stars. But what it's saying is that somebody who understands what they're talking about, they can then review, yes, the acting, the sets, but they can actually look at the message and how poignant it is. You know what I mean? Because here's the thing. You, as a white, straight critic, came up with the kind of least questionable status in the world, right? But me as I'm going to use a bunch of examples here. Me as a black queer critic, me as even me as a straight black male critic, I've got a little bit, I like me as a straight black male and I'm a critic, or me as a queer black woman, or me as a queer Asian man, or me as a trans person of color, or me as this, or me as that, or me as an indigenous whatever kind of intersection you want to add. They too have come up in the same system you have as a white critic, but through the experience of their intersections. So they came up in those same schools. They came up in those, they studied the same stuff, but their existence in the world was different. So they've got what you understand as a critic, plus their own experience and culture to inform that. So just to finish my point, it's kind of basically, and this is a very crude analogy, but basically, you might be equipped to talk about, say Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, but the person with the intersections, they're equipped to review Romeo and Juliet's Shakespeare and a bunch of other things because they've got a personal experience and probably kind of done deeper research into those things.
All right, but Noah, let's paint this optics for what all you've been saying, right? A play goes out about the experience of true blue Aussies in the 1990s. And we are expressing a piece of art that is only really going to be truly analyzed by. So let's say I say that. If that didn't pick up on the mic, I'm going to say it one more time just to re-elaborate my point. A play goes out, true blue Aussies in the 1990s, and we're depicting. You good?
Oh, voice cracked.
Yeah, we're depicting what it's like to be really an Australian in Australia in that time, a white Australian in that time that only us as white Australians can really feel, understand, and truly appreciate. And we put out a statement that says, no, sorry, we just want white people only to review this play. Do you reckon that flies in this day and age?
It doesn't. And the reason why it doesn't is because, and again, I want to remind you, this is a devil's advocate question. This is not.
I think they get the point now. I think
I'm just making sure. I'm just making sure. No, because if we ever post it on TikTok, and I'm not trying to get you blasted. But
the 6-second clips. I don't want to see none of that. This is long form content of audio that we're giving. So
exactly, this is not. It's not a coon situation. Don't worry about it. But
I know I am the light skinned person in this situation. Please.
But the reason why that doesn't fly is because you have several questions. One, why did the writer feel such a strong need to tell that story when we've gotten those stories the whole way through? That's your that's everything from just like what you see on the billboards. That's Neighbours. That's your Home and Aways. That's your whatever. Like we've gotten that so many times. So why does that play? Why do you feel that needs to be reiterated when it already is the status quo? We are we as the intersections, we as the marginalized communities, we are the ones that have to be added on to the plates that is that. So that's the first question I'm asking. Secondly, if you were to say that would be redundant because that's already a lot of the like you you specifying that would be racist because that's already the majority of a lot of the papers. So why are you expressing that further? Oh, this is a white play for white people. That's straight out of, like, why are you trying to separate whiteness when you guys already are running the things? And this brings me to the point that I was going to make, both to the last question and your point, is that the whole reason why Seven Methods made this call, because this is something, as far as I know, only happened for Australia, or at the very least the Melbourne run. In the New York run and in the UK run, I haven't fact checked this, but I think there may have been some white critics or whatever. I'm not too sure, but at least for Melbourne, that's the call they made. It was done. This wasn't done. It was done to protect the play, the production, sorry, and to make sure that it's kind of getting the fullest review it can and the most honest review it can, positive or negative. But also it's to make these arts, to make these institutions like get their act together. Get their act together, because at the end of the day, going back to this article, the reason why there's not a review is because they asked for people of color, and the Age didn't have people of color.
Do we know that for a fact though?
Well, I mean, they didn't have any. At the very least, they didn't have anyone available to review this play.
So maybe they had
which that says enough.
Okay.
And now obviously,
but no. Also on your point of what you just said, playing devil's advocate, because I know there's TikTok now, and you brought that up. I need to stop doing that. It's disrupting the flow of this conversation. But on your point that of your experiences of different intersections coming up, and if I made that made a play about Australia, it wouldn't really be the best optic. But when is that ever going to change? Is there ever going to be a point where you say that it happened in New York and other places, but when is that line going to be crossed where we don't have situations like this where we're only specifying certain critics to come watch our show? When do I at what point as a critic can I actually go and just give an opinion on this?
When the playing field is even, when the playing field is more even, because at the moment it isn't. And the thing is, you, the white critic, are the majority of the issue is that your view and your perspective is only. See, if this was happening in a world where we've been raised with cultural nuance and a deeper understanding of other intersections and other cultures and all that kind of stuff, then we wouldn't need to say POC only, because you'd probably be working in a place that's already, whatever. Like you wouldn't necessarily feel like, you wouldn't even feel like you're being barred the opportunity to do your job, because doing your job would look different. The issue is that the whole structure around how your job works is the problem.
So you're saying a place like New York and other countries, their level of representation is already established well enough, where a play like 7 Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner, they know that when they present their art there, that it's not going to be tainted in the wrong light. Is that what you're saying?
I can't say that for a fact because I haven't seen the reviewers who did the reviews back in the UK and America.
Yeah.
I know that some of them would have been people of color. I can. It's an assumption, but I can safely assume that was the case. So I can't really speak to that. But what I can say is that like the system basically isn't equipped to make an accurate judgment. And in the producers behind this, which in this case was the Darlinghurst Theatre Company, and I think which the Green Door Theatre Company, them making that call is something that shifts it, because at the end of the day, it's like if there's an issue, being amicable isn't necessarily going to solve things. When you look at the civil rights, they always talk about, the peaceful marches and everything. They talk about the peaceful marches, and they bring up Martin Luther King, who obviously was, one of the crown jewels of that movement. But they forget about the Malcolm X's. They forget about how many hands had to be thrown. How much, they forget about the fact that there had to be a disruption. Even with the Black Lives Matter protest back in 2020, that was obviously against COVID rules. It was against a bunch of rules or whatever. But it's like the issues were so prevalent, we had to break the rules. Like, if there's a system that needs to be broken or dismantled, you're not going to fix that system by adhering to that system. Yeah, it's just not going to work. Slavery didn't end. Yes, eventually, you know, in America at least they outlawed it, but it didn't change. You know, that didn't change. You know, because actually, you know, to use a better example, you know how slavery ended in Haiti. They rebelled.
Okay.
That's one of the few nations that actually rebelled, and even in America there was protest against it. There was movements against it.
Yeah.
And then it was eventually dismantled because eventually it also happened to line up with the bottom line. Like, and even use that example, right? Even though slavery was eventually outlawed in America, part of the reason why it was outlawed is because not only was there, you know, a rising kind of voice against it, but also it no longer made financial sense. If we make it so, if, you know, we need to disrupt these systems. I mean, you know, the age is going to take a long time to kind of shake up and change structures like the age, you know. But them not getting to review it denied them an opportunity to kind of have a voice on a critically acclaimed play that is going to continue to run or whatever. Their voice, I hope, or I like to think, got a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
And
I think one thing I also want to say that I know throughout this podcast, like, I've been a key points, and we've been saying, like, I've been playing devil's advocate and don't want parts of it to clip up. But then I just realized in that moment, like, me just saying that it might be insensitive for someone who actually had the opinions that I was playing the hypothetical of, you know. And I think if you're someone who's listening to this podcast and I don't know, you read that article and you somewhat agreed with some of the things that was said on the age, I think one thing I just like to ask is, like, I think we ending this quite well in having like an open discussion about it, and maybe just listen to Noah's points and maybe think about the biases that you maybe had growing up that you maybe were unaware of, and maybe willingly said some things to a specific type of art that, you know, you've actually didn't know that you actually offended. Like, you know, a lot of the times, and I think it's great that even in companies now they do classes where they speak about unconscious bias, because even me as a South African in Australia, might have an unconscious bias in the way I talk to some of my Caucasian friends. Everyone has unconscious bias in their way they talk to different people of different cultures. And, you know, as we're growing up now in a multicultural environment, and it's going to be even more for our kids, you know, it's going to be even more better. We can't be, as adults now, going into the next generation not trying to learn what's hurting other people groups and be offended to different things when it just seems like it's hurting me. Sit down, have the conversation like me and Noah were having, where now we're actually talking about why did this happen, and not run straight to, no, this is wrong. So and I didn't like, so yeah, me, I just want to say that because, you know, maybe someone was listening and just feel like I was taking the piss of them if they had the same opinion that I was saying. But I don't want to be offensive in that nature. We just really just want to start this conversation because people have opinions, and it's like things like this, sitting down and actually talking about it, where we can learn about from one another. Yeah.
I think, I want to add as well to kind of those watching, and again, I mean, it's clear what, you know, our stances, or at least, you know, at least mine in terms of like personally. But I think for those who are watching this and are kind of wondering still kind of what the issue is, I think when you kind of look at situations like this and you kind of wonder what's the big deal, or why they're saying that, and this is I'm talking particularly to those who kind of belong to a position of power. So that might be those who are, you know, white people, white men, straight guys. We've all got levels of privilege in our life. Let me just make that clear.
Even us as just
even us sitting in the screen as well. Like I've got a black experience, which kind of, it gets me a bit of a that maybe is a disadvantage in the West. But then I'm a straight dude.
Yeah.
And then I'm also like, I'm able-bodied as well, that kind of stuff. So I'm not. Basically, I'm saying this point to say that when you look at these issues, when you see people kicking up a fuss or whatever phrase, and you're like, oh gosh, what's the big deal? Pause for a moment, kind of like Randall was saying, kind of ask why it's happening, look at your unconscious biases, but also put your ego to the side, because in terms of this article, displayed something that, and this sounds like an insult, but I'm not using it as an insult because this exists for every different privilege. But this article was an example of white fragility. What white fragility is basically when to give it a rough definition, it's basically when if there's like a club or something or says, oh, black people only, the white person says, why can't I go in? That's basically what white fragility is. Basically that kind of like offense that's found when you're disallowed to do something because of your whiteness. And the reason why that's a bad thing is because oftentimes you'll see a lot of arguments. Well, isn't that what's the word? Reverse racism. Reverse racism, right? And the reason why that's not a thing is because racism is based in power and it's based in privilege. And so for you, if you go to a bar that's like, queer people only, and you're not queer, why can't I go in? I should be allowed to go in. That's just reverse homophobia or heterophobia, or whatever. Like the whole city has clubs that are for heterosexual people. But this is the one space they have, and it's like, and you want to infiltrate that. And, I said white fragility, but this exists for men. It's a big thing with men.
No, that's another. That's another
episode. We won't go into the depths of it, but it's the same thing that men have when women say, oh, you know what? I'm going to do a girls trip. If girls are having a girls trip, would you then be like, oh, why can't I come? What do you mean? That's sexism. That's reverse sexism. It's not. The world is generally wired towards men. So give people their space to exist without having to feel that. The same thing happens with, I've just used the heterosexual queer example. I've used the male female example. It could happen with, I fear that I've kind of gone on tangents, but I basically say that, look, like, you probably have more ego and fragility than you realize. And you're not necessarily wrong for having that, but you're wrong for not dismantling it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
Like, it's because here's the thing, because at the end of the day, we are all some worse than others, but we are all pawns and victims of the white supremacist, the innately white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative society we live in. Right? We are all a part of that, and we are all, and to many degrees, we're all victims of it. Now, some worse than others. Let me make that clear. But that is to say, that system, which is this kind of one blanketing system, erases the nuance of all the differences of our humanity, and it's our job to unpack and decolonize that. And that's kind of basically what we're trying to do in this conversation of conversations to come. We could go a lot further, but you can see the sky's getting darker now.
Yeah.
And I've got a long train journey ahead of me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We hope that, this was insightful. Really hope that, just got something out of it and made you kind of just think, and it was a good, this was a think piece today. I feel like this is not what this was. This was a think piece.
Definitely.
I
also want to add as well, if you had any thoughts you wanted to add, feel free to message, feel free to comment, feel free to message the page, feel free to message us. If you had anything that you had any issues with, if we kind of were unintentionally kind of harmful or offensive in a way, especially to some of the communities we reference, let us know, call us out. Like, we're learning at the same time. Like, please, like, we do not have all the answers.
If one thing we're always gonna say about in this podcast is, like, we don't have high egos. Like, if you feel like we said something that was out of pocket, we want to make a space where we're gonna say something that's gonna be wrong. We're human. We're human. But we're here to just have conversation. Learn,
and we'll apologize. We'll apologize on the podcast. None of that. YouTube. If we're wrong, we're wrong. We'll unpack where we're wrong too. Yeah. So let us know if we did anything wrong. And also, it's on a personal level. This ain't necessarily Kofi and Rembrandt. This is no talking wild, but screw the age, bro. Screw the age, that dusty ass paper. I'm sorry. I know we probably shouldn't. I know we just had all that nuanced discussion and everything like that. On a personal level, this is not Kofi and Ren. This is no the cost of being reckless. The age sucks. Elizabeth Flux, you need to do better. And on a personal opinion, even though I'm glad that we had a discussion about it, now I'm talking about the actual specific paper and the racist cartoon by Joe Benke or whatever. The reason, and I'm gonna speak directly.
Oh, we could go forever. We could go.
No. I'm gonna get this off. I'm gonna get this off.
I feel like when you're looking forward like that, and I was like, oh, he could go for another half an hour.
No, yeah, I won't go for half an hour. But this is borderline reckless, but it's not that bad. But I want to speak directly to the Age, Elizabeth Flux, in regards to the whole Joe Benke cartoon. I went on Twitter and I saw that you were shocked that they put that cartoon in the print, and you say that when you wrote the article, it wasn't your intention for it to kind of be taken that way. I saw some comments saying, "Oh no, now all nuance and discussion has been erased because of that racist cartoon." And then she said on Twitter, like, "Oh, like I didn't know they were going to do that. That does not fit with the article, right?" I actually believe you. I don't think that was your intention, even though I do think your article was rubbish. I don't think it was your intention. But even you highlighting that and just kind of giving a voice to that actually is what opens that opened the window for that cartoon then to be placed. I think you either didn't realize or had a willful ignorance of the paper you're writing for, and you should have known when writing that paper that the potential for things to be skewed that way, the potential for it to be used as ammunition for racists against this play could have happened. And
actually, okay, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I agree with that.
And it's like when you're talking about these things, we're all about, yes, you need nuance. Yes, you need to hear about this side and that side. But you need to be aware of the fact that there are some things when you talk about the other side, you're allowing other things to, you're opening the door for, more bigoted views to come forward. And so, you being shocked at that article, at that comic, why are you surprised? You should have seen that coming. You and your experience should have known that would happen. You work for the Age. You've seen what the comments are like, and you should have known better. And yeah, to be honest, shame on you. You shouldn't you're too senior in your career to be doing this. I don't say that as a diss. That sounds like a diss, but that's when you're having these discussions, you need to be aware of whose voice you're actually platforming in these decisions. Now, we were playing devil's advocate in this conversation, but this is over the blanket of we think that that's wrong. We weren't trying to give platform to those who think. We're not trying to give platform to racists. This was all as discussion to kind of explore why things like this are problematic. And I hope that you realize that. You probably won't, but
One thing I'll say though, she definitely doesn't deserve shame, or like no shame on her, but just do better. That's all I'll say. Like,
that's fair. That's
true. No shame. Like, people make mistakes, but like Noah said, like, I mean, you gave it platform for things like that to happen. So next time, have the frame of mind and learn from this mistake that it was not the right decision to go.
That's a good correction. That's a good call. Yeah. Just do better. Like, from here, just do better.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to see another Elizabeth Flux talking about, oh, why are we doing this? You know what I mean?
There was a lot of hypocritical things in the thing, but anyway, this is me being cutthroat now because it's getting dark. But yeah, you appreciate you came all this way to watch it, but now we're bouncing. All right. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, we out.
Like, comment, subscribe as well.
All right, peace.
Sorry. Yeah, that was peace. Sorry, my bad. I really cooked that.